Good morning, onliners. What happened?
I fixed your phone.
Hi, Martha.
You did?
Good to
Yay!
see you
Yeah,
back.
You too.
You got a new colored button though.
That's okay. Thank you,
The
Stephen.
top one I didn't know didn't work.
Oh, does it still work? No. Okay.
So,
Thank you.
okay, yeah.
I just got a job offer where they say I need my WeChat.
Oh,
You're
It doesn't have anything,
Yeah, no problem.
no fake sweeteners or anything like that. It's just cheddar.
yeah.
Parts for my old phone.
Thank you, Stephen.
I was gonna change out the whole screen, but it didn't fit.
What?
I was gonna change out the whole screen, but it didn't fit.
Okay.
It's easier just to change the screen out, like the whole front of it.
This is weird holding my phone again.
Yeah.
I got one just like it, so.
Now with the black button.
Yeah, actually, that's a completely unique phone. I don't think there's
Like my car. My
I've seen a
car,
couple of it like that.
my white car
Did you do
has,
sound check so they can hear?
my white car has
Let me look.
black handles.
Oh, wow. That's
one,
different.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I hear
9,
ya.
10. Are we on?
Yeah, we're live.
Oh,
They heard our little talking about the phone.
sorry.
Makes you feel like you're part of the family.
Yes.
When half people
Yeah.
call him and say, hey, can you fix mine? You want mine?
No, I'm not.
Send it
I'm
COD.
not gonna do it anymore. No, I hate fixing phones.
Uh-oh.
I appreciate
Okay, so we'll go ahead and pray and get started then. I guess since we're all here. Lord, thank you for the good day today. Thank you for getting us all up and getting us going and being able to study the Bible. Lord, help me to teach the lesson the way it should be taught and to help the people to learn. Lord, I know I've learned. Thank you. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so it's a couple interesting things. And actually, let me see. I asked. So we're in, where are we at? Romans 3. Yeah, we'll probably cover like 3:13 to, I don't know, 18 or something like that. But something interesting that I've been waiting to discuss, if I can pull it up here. There it is. Okay. Let's pull up my messages. Just, wasn't prepared. All right, something interesting is, so do you guys know who David Daniels is?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a couple of his books. So a couple chick tracts of that. So he actually made a video based on the verses that we're going to talk about today. So he made a video. It's a video about notes. Okay, so it's a video about this guy named Origen and his writings. With there's this guy a long time ago, around the year 100. He's a Greek scholar, but this guy named Origen, he wrote this book called the Hexaplot. And am I saying that right, Greg?
What?
Hexaplot. Yeah. Hexaplot
Six
means
what?
I think it means six ply or six
hexagon?
column. Yeah, kind of like a hexagon. Anyway, so this book called the Hexaplot took this guy Origen like 20 years to write, and he used slaves to write it. It was his life's work. It was a really cool book. It doesn't exist today. We have no idea what it. We have some idea of what it looked like, but we don't have a copy of it. So we just have people who have referenced the book, and so that's how we know about it. So the Hexaplot then became what Bible scholars call the Greek Septuagint. So the Hexaplot, so Origen's writings became the Hexaplot, and then the Hexaplot became the Greek Septuagint, which is what the Roman Catholics use for their Old Testament. That became the Latin Vulgate in the year 450, and then the Latin Vulgate was then translated into what's called the Douay-Rheims, I think it's Douay-Rheims Bible. Is that, I'm not saying it. Douay-Rheims Bible.
Do away rooms Bible.
Yes, yes. So which is the first, one of the first English Catholic Bibles in in the world. And what's interesting about that is that it's pretty, it's a pretty good translation. I'm not gonna, it's obviously, we're gonna talk about some of its failings, but it's, one of the issues that we have is that it's actually the Douay Rheims Bible, Douay Rheims, but anyway, it's a very good translation of the Latin. And the Latin is a very good translation of the Greek Septuagint. And the Greek Septuagint is a very good translation of the Hexapla, which was written by a guy named Origen, without the Holy Spirit. And we're going to see that. So it's a good copy of corruption. So one of the things when I was young, I would read through Romans, and I would come to Romans 3:10, and if you look down there, Romans 3:10, it says, "As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways. And the way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Now, what if I told you that's a direct quote from Psalm 14, 1 through 3? Would I be telling the truth? No, it's not. It's close, yeah, sort of. The first verse 10, 11, and 12 are from Psalm 14, 1 through 3. Now, in the Douay Rheims Bible, it's actually Psalm 13. So, because they take out a chapter in that Bible. Anyway, so the issue that we have is that's a direct quote. If you go back to the Douay Rheims Bible, that would be a direct quote, that whole period, because look where it says, Paul is saying, as it is written, and then he quotes the Old Testament verses up until verse 18. So he quotes the Bible, right? So you would think, well, man, that's a quote from the Bible. You know, obviously there's scripture somewhere in the Old Testament that says what Paul just said, and that's what Origen thought. Origen thought that. He said, okay, well, obviously that's Psalm 14. So if you turn to Psalm 14, that's not what it says. Psalm 14. We'll go there real quick. Let's go to Psalm 14. Actually, who's there now?
I am.
Who wants to read it? Okay, Jenny, why don't you read it? Psalm 14, 1 through 3. Jenny Miller.
1 through 3.
1 through 3.
The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside. They are all together become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one.
Okay, so it doesn't say anything about their throat being an open sepulchre. Doesn't say anything about their tongue. Doesn't say anything about deceit. Doesn't say anything about their mouth. It doesn't say anything about bitterness. Doesn't say anything about their feet. Doesn't say anything about destruction or misery is in their ways. It doesn't say anything about them not knowing peace. It doesn't say anything about, it says something about the fear of God. So that's a problem if you are a Bible student and you say, hey, you know, this should be in the Old Testament somewhere. And Origen was a Bible student. And so you know what he did? He took those words from Psalm, when he was writing his Hexapla, he took those words from Romans, from verse 10 to verse 18, and he took those from the New Testament, and he put those into the Old Testament.
That's wild, man.
That
Orange
is
is stupid.
wild. And then you know what happened? Another person wrote a book in Greek called the Septuagint, because they got the Septuagint from the Hexapla. What's interesting is that the Septuagint was supposedly written in the year 285 BC. So how do words from Paul, which were written somewhere around the year 60 AD, get put into an Old Testament document?
I know.
go ahead, Greg.
Time travel.
Time
That's what I was
travel.
gonna say.
300 year, almost 350 year difference. No, the actual correct answer is that the Septuagint is a fake.
That was actually
That's a
Captain
fake.
America.
I'm
Say it
sorry?
again.
It was actually Captain America. He was going back for.
I haven't seen that one yet, so stop talking about it.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler.
How about the Twilight Zone?
What do you got?
So one of those references, like the part where Paul is quoting something.
Oh, we're gonna go over that.
13 through 18.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, you said something that
Yeah.
nobody heard before.
Okay, the Septuagint is a fake.
Thank you.
Now,
Wait, what?
the Septuagint is a fake.
Oh,
It's actually
wow.
fake. So, and of course you have the Latin Vulgate, which is based on the Septuagint. And then you have the current, Catholic Bible, which is based on the Latin Vulgate. So it's basically fake. So you have words that were, and they know this, so they've updated the Douay Rheims Bible. But you can get it online, the old one, the 1899 or 1890.
Honestly, I didn't know that. They fixed it back.
Yeah, it's been fixed. Yeah. Don't worry, it's been fixed. It's because it's such a blatant error that they had to fix it. It's kind of like the, what was it, the updated versions of the what are those guys called? The Mormon Bible, and then the Book of Mormon, and then the updated versions of the New World Translation. You know, where you what is it? What are those guys? They have the New World Translation.
That's Joe's.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if once you point out the errors in the New World Translation, then they have to change their Bible again to get the errors out of there. So because they weren't in there originally, you know. But anyway, but that's the whole point. Now, David Daniels will explain this in his video, and so I have some homework for you. I told them that I'm going to have you guys watch the video. You have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Answer.
I've got a copy of the Septuagint,
Mhm.
the Old Testament, and apparently it was translated into English by George Washington's secretary.
Oh, okay. That's
So
interesting.
I thought that was fascinating. But
Wouldn't that be Alexander Hamilton?
No, he's a real secretary, not the Secretary of State.
Oh.
Yeah, his real secretary.
his personal secretary.
My bad. A little.
It's fascinating. It has over 400 words that was translated slave.
So when they translate this, do they do it in song or music or dance?
I'm sure they
That's a
have
cultural
fees.
reference, you guys
They
can
probably
find.
have fees for completing it.
We're
I
gonna,
didn't get it.
the musical Hamilton.
You heard the also Hamilton.
Well, another cultural reference would be to say that it would be like Mrs. O'Wiggins translating for Tim Conway.
Oh, yes. Oh, dude, that
I have no idea.
What?
Anyway, so.
would be Carol Burnett. Carol Burnett show.
The YouTube video.
The secretary chewing her gum, doing her nails.
Okay, go
Because
ahead.
I have no idea what you're talking about now. The YouTube video that I want you to watch is How Did That Get There? By David Daniels. It's actually part 13 of his Sinaiticus series. So it's called How Did That Get There? So if you're watching this on
That's
YouTube,
Yeah.
at the end of this, make sure you watch How Did That Get There?
Is that what it's gonna be?
That's-
What? I'm sorry? Is
So
what?
he said David Daniels, who's a chick track guy, he has a video called How Did It Get There?
How
on YouTube.
did that?
How did that?
How
get
did-
there?
Daniels had.
We'll
How-
try to remember to put the link.
We'll put the link in the description. Yeah.
Oh, yes, because I'll faithfully look for it.
Yeah, definitely. It's anyway, it's a good video. He explains it a lot better than I do, and I told him so. I told him that it's already going to be. I'm going to have people watch that video. So that's your homework. So right after church, go ahead and go do that.
How many
It's not
credit
really-
points?
It won't be
is
there
worth?
then.
Wait, what?
How many credit points is it worth?
100.
That's what see the price, you'll get your reward.
Yeah, if you watch that video.
Oh, gee.
If you watch that video, you don't even have to write a book report. But if you watch that video, just give yourself a 100 on the test.
Okay.
So that's
Yes.
Just watch it. You don't have to remember anything from it. All right. So
Next week.
So that's the issue there. We got into that pretty quickly. Which is good. Because now
Okay,
it's-
so if part of that, what Paul said, is not in the Old Testament, which I thought it was but didn't know where is it?
Well, it is in the Old Testament. You're right about that, but it's not in Psalm 14.
Right, but where did Paul find it?
Oh,
Right.
that's a great
Yeah.
question. Okay, now I'll explain that to you. So Okay, so from verses 10 to, let's see, 10, 11, 12 is actually Psalm 14, 1 through 3. That's where he got that from. But verses 13 are from Psalm 5:9 and Psalm 143, 140 verse 3. So go to Psalm chapter 5. Psalm chapter 5. So we'll go over some of those verses.
5:9.
Because Jesus alluded to that too.
Yeah, oh yeah. It's actually, Jesus has a lot to do with, yeah, go to 5:9. Actually, go to, Jenny, you gonna read it?
The other Jenny?
Was
She's
that-
not here. Uh-oh.
You can get there. Where am I going?
Psalm 5:9, around here.
Romans 5:9?
No,
I'll read it, what do you want?
Go from verse,
I'm there.
Psalm,
Greg wins.
Greg, go ahead and read from verse 8 to verse 10.
Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face. For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue. Destroy thou them, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against thee.
That's right.
Amen.
So
Okay,
that's
so there it
a
is.
direct reference to the Antichrist. So the what's interesting is Paul. You remember back up in Romans, he's talking about people. He's talking about mankind. Well, here David is writing a psalm, and he makes a reference to the Antichrist. Destroy thou them. That's a just he wants to destroy the Antichrist. Who is he saying about this? About these people, their faithfulness. Let's see, there is no faithfulness in their mouth. So that's actually talking about the Antichrist and the fallen angels. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulcher. That means just like Jesus said, on the outside you have you're white and pure. On the inside you have dead man's bones, and that's a reference to the Antichrist. So Paul knows that, so he draws a conclusion that we, as an unsaved person, are just like Antichrist. We are Antichrist. So we have the same, as an unsaved person, we would have the same judgment as the devil, which is to be thrown into the lake of fire. So
That's right.
that's kind of an interesting thing. Paul actually references to the Antichrist when he's trying to describe humankind without Jesus Christ. So Paul is trying. So Paul is basically correlating unsaved people with the Antichrist in that sense. So, and of course we have was it Matthew 23:27? You have Jesus actually making reference to this verse in Psalm 5. So. And then, of course, it's in Luke 11:44. Go to Luke 11:44, because there's a couple times that talk about the throat being an open sepulchre.
11:44.
11:44. Luke 11:44. So everybody knows the one in Matthew. 11:44 says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are as graves which appear not, and the men that walk over them are not aware of them." So that's basically the same as what he was talking about in Matthew. And then go to Acts 23, because Paul talks about this again. Go to Acts 23, verse 3. Okay, who wants to read it? Okay, so John, read from verse 1.
Acts 23, verse 1.
Yeah, Acts 23, verse 1, and then read down to the end of verse 3.
And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, for thou sittest to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law.
Yeah, so call them a whited wall. So Jesus called these guys, what was it, open sepulchres, just like, and then obviously it says you're white on the outside, full of dead man's bones on the inside.
Yeah.
So Paul makes reference again. He makes reference to the Psalm 5:9, and then here he actually traps Ananias. He traps Ananias in a sin. Actually, is what he does, because he basically says to the high priest, "You don't know the law because you're telling him to hit me in the mouth." That's the whole point there. The priest was allowed to command Paul to be beaten, but he wasn't allowed. Nobody was allowed to hit him in the mouth. So it was kind of it's cruel and unusual punishment according to the Jewish law to hit a person in the mouth. And we know that because of Deuteronomy 25 verses 1 and 2 talks about the punishment. The punishment that Paul should have received was to be laid on his stomach, and then people were to hit him on the back, not on the face. So that's we have the Fourth Amendment in the United States. So here they have the Paul knew his rights basically. So no cruel and unusual punishment. So
That's interesting.
40 lashes though. So it's kind of in
40
America,
minus 1.
Yes, take one.
Not in Deuteronomy.
No, not in Deuteronomy,
It's just
but
40.
yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of a cool thing there. But yeah, what was it? 40 lashes is considered a death sentence. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So
Is that in Deuteronomy?
Deuteronomy 25, 1 and 2. Are you going there? Might as well go there. Just go there and read it. We'll only reference to it. 20. Oh, you're not there yet.
25 what?
1 and 2.
If there be a controversy between me and they come unto judgment,
Sorry.
between men, if there be a controversy between men and they come unto judgment, that the judges may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. And it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, that the judge shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face, according to his fault, by a certain number, 40 stripes he may give him and not exceed, lest if he should exceed and beat him above these with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, so you're supposed to lay down, but not the face. So
Yeah.
that's what do I always cry before I get in a fight? Not the face, not the face.
I thought you said not the moneymaker.
Another
Well,
one
I mean,
maker.
it is the money maker. I mean, come on. I spoil it with these glasses though. So, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. It may be possible, since it's in Acts 23, that being hit in the mouth was actually a blessing to Paul instead, because in another part of Corinthians, I think he's been whipped 5 different times on the back.
Yeah, I mean, you get a little raw.
You get a little raw, yeah, so I mean, that might have been mysterious godsend in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and that's,
Well, the back of Jesus was like a plowed field.
Yep.
You can't get any rawer than that.
Yeah, that's a bad thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad we got away from that kind of stuff here in America.
Praise the Lord.
Throw people in jail and pay.
Yeah.
For now, we use the Roman system, so we use the system of time, not the system of money, you might say. So, okay, so a couple things. Verse 13, it says, their throat is an open sepulcher. So what's interesting is if you look in 13, it says throat, and then it goes on to say tongues, and then it says down at the end of 13, it says lips. Then at 14, it says mouth, and then down there in 15 it says feet. So there's actually a discussion of body parts and how they are used to curse the Lord. So
Wicked from head to toe.
wicked from head to toe, yeah. So you got throat, tongue, lips, mouth. That's a thing. Is you probably heard the tongue or the pin is measured in the sword. Well, the reason why is because the pin conveys a message. So it can convey the message to go kill tons of people, and just an interesting little tidbit. It's like how many people during World War II did Adolf Hitler kill? So anybody want to guess?
0
No, he killed one.
himself.
He killed himself. That's right. He pulled the trigger on himself. He fired one bullet during the entire war, and it was into his brain. But how many people was he responsible for killing? Like 40 million people. I mean, or more, really. I mean, you think about just 20 million Russians alone. So that's.
And afterwards, when the people of the war apologized to people, they'd say, I was just obeying orders. I was just obeying orders.
Exactly. That was their excuse. I was just obeying orders.
Yeah.
Well, whose orders? Obviously it's Hitler's. But go ahead, John.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're okay.
It was interesting, he was pointing out all the body parts with the scripture verses.
Yeah.
And, when I did a study one time on the Exodus, as they were leaving, as they came up to the Red Sea, they were stopped because of the water. Well, there was like a high mountain on the right and a high mountain on the left. And here comes the Egyptians coming down. They had nowhere to escape. Well, the place they were located at was called in Exodus, I think 14:2, High Roth. That's how I pronounce it. And so I looked it up just to see what it meant. And it meant mouth of the serpent.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so a picture of salvation, they were escaping destruction from Pharaoh.
So it's kind of like the Pharaoh was going into the mouth, and they were coming out.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing.
Well, I think it's in the Proverbs, if you set a pit for someone, you'll fall into the pit yourself.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I've accidentally done that myself. It's all right, go ahead, Johnny.
And just, and of course, the reverse on the power of the pen over the sword is that, well, yes, you could, give the order and have tons of people killed, but you could also, if somebody's attacking you and you can convince them to stand down, then you've basically beaten them without using a sword at all.
Yeah, the best way to defeat your enemy is without fighting. That's definitely true. That's definitely true. That's it's in the Art of War.
Art of War,
Yeah,
that's right.
the Art of War, and then obviously it's in the Bible. So we have that there. But so an observation of the throat. So how many of you guys brushed your teeth when you woke up this morning?
Well,
I got 1, 2,
Why are you
3,
pouting?
4.
I didn't brush my teeth this morning.
Yep, there's like
Don't
10
get
people in the
near
room. It's got to be more than 4. So anyway, I'll raise my hand. So why do you brush your teeth? What's one of the main reasons why you brush your teeth?
Get rid of bacteria.
decay.
Decay, get rid of bacteria. It's because your throat smells like death. So it literally smells like death. And why does it smell like death?
Because it's been closed up
We're
all night.
dying.
Well, because that's where you put dead things. Think about it.
Like dead lettuce and stuff like that?
Sure, dead lettuce. Dead lettuce.
I mean,
Actually, I think the lettuce is still alive when it's going down, but you put dead animals in your throat.
I'm just.
So every dead thing that you can think about that you could eat goes down your throat, goes in your mouth. It's a place of death. So, and that's I used to have a nightmare about being swallowed.
Please don't
Bye.
tell us your nightmares.
it's interesting.
I'm just saying. Please
Stephen, preach, don't ignore.
Ignore the women.
Evidently she needs
Women
to
are to be silent in the
I
church.
must
Thank you very
need to
much.
hear this. Tell me all about your dreams.
It's conviction.
I want to hear
Keep going.
the dreams.
Tell me about my
Preach.
visions and dreams. Anyway, so
The tall guy,
Yes.
600 feet high.
He is
no, it's like a
mad.
monster. So I watched the Sesame Street episode, or it might have been Muppets. Or whatever.
That's a
It
nightmare.
just freaked me out, man. It was bad. So I've been having this reoccurring nightmare ever since I was, a small, young child because of the Muppets. And it's, about being swallowed. Well, obviously the throat is a place of death, all the death and stuff goes into there, and then if you don't brush your teeth and use, literally burn that stuff out of your mouth, you'll have tooth decay and gingivitis and all that kind of stuff. So the throat is an open sepulcher, and so dead things go in. So dead flesh, dead pigs, dead cows, rotting vegetables, and because it's rotting, whether you like it or not, it's already on its way, and so death comes out. So that's the thing, you can speak death, utterances and curse and damnations and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very bad thing. So the
Can I throw in something that's just interesting you meant, because you're talking about this?
Mhm.
I was reminded when Aslan breathed, did you remember that part at the end where he breathed on the people who were going into the other world,
Aslan,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
part of the Bible?
Well, let me finish.
Oh, okay.
It's supposed that Lewis was trying to picture things about Christ and everything, and I had thought about this before seeing that on the movie. Remember when Jesus, before Pentecost, it said he breathed on them,
Yeah.
and they received the Spirit, just those the 12 or the 11 survivors,
Yeah.
Judas not included. So the 11, he breathed on them. And I know it sounds weird to think this, but I was thinking when I first read it and really thought about what had happened there, that, and this may sound strange, but I really believe it was a sweet smelling breath, like baby's breath. Babies breathe on you and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's so sweet. Well, when Jesus breathes on you, there's no death, there's no sin, there's no
That's
death,
true.
there's no decay in his throat. And so when Jesus breathed on them, if there was a scent or anything, I thought it probably was a sweet breath that breathed on them because of the fact he was without sin.
Yeah, you think about, even go back to Genesis. Well, how did God bring life to Adam? He gave him the breath of life. That's kind of a, and then obviously you have,
Oh, that's right. That when he breathed on Adam, I didn't think
Yeah.
I didn't put those two together.
well, and to even go further in your point, we're talking about, Paul is bringing up references of the Antichrist from the book of Psalms. And so it's kind of and then he's correlating those with mankind.
So the Antichrist is going to have simple chronic halitosis.
Something on that order.
What's actually, that's kind of an interesting thing if you think about, was it Psalm 14? Or is it? Anyway, I'll have to bring up the reference later, but there's a reference, I think it's Isaiah chapter 14, where they talk about the Antichrist. Is it Isaiah 14?
Yeah.
Anyway, and then it talks about, he has this death about him, dead bones, and this destruction. And there might be in other parts of it, but there, if you think about what the Antichrist is, and then you think, well, what is the Antichrist? Well, that's obviously Jesus. And so the reverse of, chapter 3 that we're talking about here would be, if you talk about Jesus, it would be his throat is like a closed sepulcher. There's no death there. It's like the outside where it's nice and whited, and there's life. There's the grass growing. That kind of stuff. So
Well, if you look at, in the Song of Solomon, chapter, where is this? 5, through the description of Christ. And in verse 13, it talks about, his cheeks are as a bed of spices, as sweet flowers, his lips like lilies, dropping sweet smelling myrrh.
Amen. That's it.
Amen.
It starts
That's
off
what
with
it is.
Oh, amen.
Valley.
head to toe there, if you look at
Oh.
the passage.
Yeah, it's kind of what part of Song of Solomon was that?
Song of Solomon
Song of
5,
Solomon.
starting at 10, 11, 12, 13.
I always thought that was a description of Solomon.
His mouth is most sweet, yea, he is altogether lovely. There
Well,
is
Song of Solomon is considered a
Right, it's prophetic over there.
prophetic,
I
it's
understand.
prophecy,
It's
yeah.
a dual verse there, but it's kind of interesting. So anyway, then it talks about the tongue. So with their tongue, they have used deceit. Go to Jeremiah chapter 9. So Okay, so then obviously we're talking about, yeah, go to Jeremiah chapter 9.
9,
Chapter
number 9.
9.
And then read verses 3 through 8. Who wants to read that one? Go ahead, Jenny, Olaf.
Jeremiah 9, 3 to 8.
3 to 8, yep.
All right. And they bend their tongues like they bow for lies, but they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth. For they proceed from evil to evil, and they know not me, saith the Lord. Take ye heed every one of his neighbor, and trust ye not in any brother. For every brother will utterly supplant, and every neighbor will walk with slanders. And they will deceive every one his neighbor, and will not speak the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies, and weary themselves to commit iniquity. Then habitation is in the midst of deceit. Through deceit they refuse to know me, saith the Lord. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will melt them, and try them. For how shall I do for the daughter of my people? Their tongue is as an arrow shot out, it speaketh deceit. One speaketh peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in heart he layeth his weight.
Wow.
Wow.
I like the part where it says, I will melt them. Yeah, so I'm talking about patty melts there. It's, actually, it's a reference to, well, okay, go to Malachi 3:3. So, reference to Malachi. You make me melt.
Aww.
If I can find it. Who wants to read it if they can find it? It's at the back of the book.
I got it.
All right, go ahead, Johnny.
And he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness.
So it's 3:3.
Yes.
Oh, I'm Micah.
Pretty far back there, Steve.
Yeah,
Let's go back, you were close.
thank you.
Had the M, the C,
Okay.
the H.
So it's basically, it's a reference to the refining that happens, you know, I'll melt them. It's actually a picture of salvation. So if you, you can melt people by throwing them into the lake of fire, or you can refine them and turn them into what you want them to be. So we melt steel and iron like that today, turn it into something useful. So the, they call it, when something's at its base state, they call it entropy or entropy. Anyway, entropy. So you have something at its base state. So it's like metal wants to turn into rust, and then rust turns into fine powder, and then it breaks down into its molecular level, and then eventually it becomes, you know, not even atomic. You know, it breaks down to the subatomic levels and that kind of stuff. Well, it's useless. You know, there's nothing useful about it. You can't do anything with it, and that's kind of what God is going to do with people who don't get saved. They're useless, so you just kind of get rid of them. You take them into their entropic state, so you melt them. So
So he's gonna do at the end of the millennium, the elements will melt with fervent heat, and then they'll have a new heaven and a new earth.
right, and so you melt them with fervent heat to change them. So obviously, you know, you can change stuff with heat, so or cool, I suppose. So in Romans, so we'll go on. Do we have time for verse 14? No, we don't. No, really. All right, so we'll just real quick go to Psalm 140, verse 3, and then we'll finish up there. So this is actually another part of where Paul is quoting in the same verse.
Psalm what?
Psalm 140, verse 3. And who wants to read that one? Okay, go ahead, Jenny.
They have sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. Selah.
Yep, and there you get the part where he's talking about the asp. So basically what Paul was doing was he was laying out a sermon to the Romans. He wasn't quoting a single Bible verse as Origen thought. He was quoting multiple Bible verses
Very good.
like any normal preacher would do. So he was just preaching to these Romans just like anybody else. He wasn't, Origen just had no idea what he was talking about. That's the problem. He was, yeah. And I fell into the same trap when I was young and unlearned also. But then I looked at the Bible and ran a couple references, and it was really simple to figure out because I believed the Bible for what it is. I didn't try and change the Bible like Origen did. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Johnny.
But it is funny though because that was probably one of his least bad mistakes then. Because I mean, okay, so he put it in the Old Testament in a place where it doesn't go, but it was still scripture.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's probably one of his least worst mistakes.
yeah. The only thing I would say is that he knew it was wrong, and he did it anyway. And then what's interesting is that he actually, we know that he knew it was wrong because he put it in brackets and said it's not supposed to be there. But then he left it in there anyway. So that's one of the big things is like this guy, you know, David Daniels pictures Origen as having two faces. He draws him having two faces. So, and the reason why is because he has one face where he speaks pleasant things and is a Bible believer, and then he has another face where he talks to other friends and tries to be popular and that kind of thing. And it's the classic case of having two masters. You can't have two masters. You can't go both ways. That's impossible.
Amen.
So, anyway, and that's where he is there. So we'll go ahead and pray and then get out of here. Lord, thank you for the good lesson. Thank you for people engaging and paying attention and all that kind of stuff. Thank you for the time to study, Lord. I appreciate it. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, onliners.
We'll see you later.
Yeah, see you later. Catch you in a bit. Go grab some tea or some popcorn maybe.
Sweet roll.
Sweet roll, they can do that.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys. Bye.
Yeah.